When we talk about Brandon Aiyuk, the focus should be on how the 49ers are working to replace him because the effort on that front has been aggressive this offseason, beginning with the signing of Mike Evans and now continuing heading up into the NFL draft. 49ers get 30 visits of prospects to their team facility before the draft. We know of six. Four of those six are being spent on wide receivers. The most recent for a speedster. His name is Caleb Douglas out of Texas Tech, but the first 2 years of his college career were spent at Florida, where he was teammates with Ricky Pearsall. Speaking of Ricky Pearsall, he is the only 49ers receiver outside of Brandon Aiyuk, who obviously doesn't count, but Pearsall's the only 49ers receiver who has scored a touchdown in their uniform, who is also under contract beyond 2026. So it makes sense that the 49ers would want to add to the receiver position throughout this NFL draft, even if they've already added Mike Evans and Christian Kirk, who was recently photographed working out with Ricky Pearsall back in Arizona. The 49ers need to add some youth to the room, and in an ideal world, Mike Evans and Christian Kirk, two respected veterans, are along as bridges for San Francisco's receiving room. Learn from Mike Evans, learn from Christian Kirk, take the torch, and then the 49ers can have some promise moving into the future beyond this 2026 season. Brock Purdy is one of the best quarterbacks in the game. He has proven that if you can get open downfield, he will get you the football. Take a look at this from Warren Sharp. The NFL leader in completion rate on passes of 10 or more yards downfield. Ranking number 1 in 2023, Brock Purdy, one of 31 quarterbacks. Ranking number 1 in 2024, Brock Purdy, number 1 of 34 qualifying quarterbacks. Ranking number 1 in 2025, Brock Purdy, number 1 of 32 qualifying quarterbacks. So he is elite. There is no question amongst reasonable minds about this. And you look at some of the targets that the 49ers have invited to their building ahead of this NFL draft. Well, Caleb Douglas is the most recent one. The guy can run. He's over 6'3", and he moves at a 4.39 40. Put on the tape for Texas Tech from 2025. Caleb Douglas was flying. He was their leading wide receiver, and he picked up a whole heck of a lot of yardage on deep passes, ranked 10th in the nation on receptions of 20 or more yards. Those long strides really get the MPH going, as he has some room, as he has some grass to pick up full speed, and it ends up being fun to watch. Also, with the height, Caleb Douglas is able to win some contested catches. Now, the drawback here is that he suffers some lapses in concentration. He had 7 drops this past season, 3 drops the season before. That is going to have to get more consistent, and that's probably the main reason why Caleb Douglas is not projected to be picked until the 6th or the 7th round of this 2026 NFL draft. The 49ers so far have invited Casey Concepcion of Texas A&M to their facility, Omar Cooper Jr. of the defending national champion Indiana Hoosiers, and Denzel Boston of the University of Washington. All 3 of those receivers have a chance to go in the first round. Caleb Douglas doesn't. And, it should be noted that it's impossible to put a finger on exactly where the 49ers are going to attack this receiver position, but it's a really good bet that they're going to attack it at some point of this draft. And what this 30 visit tells us is that the 49ers are considering attacking the receiver position at multiple different levels of the draft. Pick number 27 is a possibility. Pick number 58 in the second round is a possibility. That's what those first 3 visits tell us. And then this 4th wide receiver visit for a guy with a 6th or a 7th round grade tells us that the 49ers are looking later in the draft as well. I know that as we speak, they don't have a pick beyond the 4th round, but a trade is always possible. That can mean that they fall back into the later rounds, or there is a non-zero chance that somebody like Caleb Douglas slips into undrafted free agency. You also can't look at this specifically through the lens of the 2026 draft. The 49ers were very interested in Christian Kirk when he was coming out of college at Texas A&M. Obviously, he went to the Arizona Cardinals, but they got some intel on Christian Kirk during the pre-draft process, and ultimately, several years later, they signed Christian Kirk. So when you do your homework during the top 30 visit and during the pre-draft process, it can come to pay dividends several years down the road. It's not just about this season, but I think that when we talk about overarching draft strategy this season, the 49ers are very, very interested, as they should be, in adding a receiver. So many people have talked about Denzel Boston, who's the big target, the 6'3" target out of Washington, as a perfect understudy for Mike Evans. I see some of that with Caleb Douglas. Very similar height to Denzel Boston. Again, that contested catch ability does show up on tape, but he's not quite as strong as Denzel, not quite as strong as Mike Evans. In fact, Caleb Douglas played the Z receiver position in a spread offense at Texas Tech, which means he didn't really have to play against press coverage. The X receiver position has to line up as the split end, and he has to face press coverage because he doesn't get the benefit of motion or the benefit of lining up off of the line of scrimmage. So your X receiver typically has to be either very big and strong or very fast, or both. Caleb Douglas has the potential to mature into a truly big, strong, and fast frame. I mean, he already has most of those descriptors applied to him, but I still think he needs to add some more muscle. But although he has the potential to play X, although he has the potential to be the type of body that can line up as a split end and beat press coverage outside, he only has experience being a successful Z receiver, as a skinnier, lankier guy in college. So that is what the 49ers have been able to see on tape so far. And I think that they demand adaptability out of their receivers. So if they do draft somebody like Caleb Douglas, then they're going to ask for him to hit that NFL weight room and develop the ability to also play the X. And I think in that way, Caleb Douglas can also take a lot from Mike Evans. But maybe we shouldn't overcomplicate this. Maybe Caleb Douglas, if he ends up being a San Francisco 49er, can go back to one of his original mentors, and that is Ricky Pearsall himself. Because Ricky's natural spot for the 49ers is that Z receiver position. And of course, Ricky was teammates with Caleb Douglas back at the University of Florida, 2022, 2023. Now, Douglas had a couple hundred receiving yards over those two seasons. He wasn't the main featured guy. He wasn't as prominent as Ricky Pearsall in that offense, but I'm sure that the 49ers, when they were studying Ricky before he was a first-round draft pick in 2024, took note of Caleb Douglas. Then they saw him transfer to Texas Tech, and then they saw him explode to become the Red Raiders' leading receiver. But as a Z, both Caleb Douglas and Ricky Pearsall have seen their most productive football. Again, that's the flanker, the Z, right? That's the position that's going to be lined up off the line of scrimmage, that's going to come into motion a whole lot more often. You're not going to be as counted on to beat just straight up press coverage against the opposition's best cornerback. That's Mike Evans' job for the 49ers, and the 49ers are looking at other potential rookies to maybe even slide into that Z receiver position immediately. Somebody like Denzel Boston, who does have that bigger frame, but I do think that somebody like Caleb Douglas at least has potential to play the X because of the frame. You just have to muscle it up a little bit more, and you have to work on the technique so he can beat some of that press coverage. The run game is so important for the 49ers at the wide receiver position. And when you talk about replacing Brandon Aiyuk, well, it's not just about the separation. It's about what he was able to bring run blocking as a wide receiver. Because Caleb Douglas played the Z in a spread system, it's a little bit more difficult to just look at his tape and say, okay, this guy's ready to run block at the 49ers level, because obviously the system for Kyle Shanahan is different. Again, it is more of a physical projection, and then it's a projection of willpower. It's what kind of attitude does this guy have? Because typically, if you have the physical tools, if you are 6'3 plus and you do build up the strength, you're going to be bigger than defensive backs, and you should be able to block, but that is only half the equation. The rest of it comes from desire to get downfield, to contribute in a way that is not going to individually statistically reward you. And a lot of the reason why the 49ers bring players in on 30 visits is to see what kind of attitude this guy has, to get to know more about a player. And somebody like Caleb Douglas, if you haven't seen him in your particular system doing what is so important, blocking, if you've only seen him as a Z receiver in a spread at Texas Tech, maybe you've heard a little bit from Ricky Pearsall about his attitude. But if you want to know more, that is why you bring him in on that 30 visit. Looking at the receivers that the 49ers have brought in so far, I talked about Denzel Boston being a big contested catch guy. Casey Concepcion is a real separator. And one thing about Casey Concepcion that I think is extremely, extremely appealing to the 49ers is that he was a weapon on returns, on special teams. He housed a couple punts at Texas A&M. The 49ers could use an instant impact weapon at return man with Sky Moore having signed with the Green Bay Packers. Casey Concepcion, I think, would have an immediate role on special teams. And obviously, the 49ers would have room for him in that wide receiver room, especially given the fact that they're a little longer in the tooth there now with Mike Evans and Christian Kirk both coming aboard. This would be an immediate battle with a Jacob Cowing. It would be an immediate battle with a Jordan Watkins, a couple of 49ers young players who are looking to make their mark this year. Then there's Omar Cooper Jr., who, it's funny because the 49ers have dropped from one of the most prolific yards after the catch yak teams that we had ever seen. That was during the Deebo Samuel era. Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, obviously really good at that. Well, those players, either have been phased out of the system or have ghosted the building, or George Kittle, in his case right now, he suffered an Achilles tear, so we'll see if he's back for week 1 of 2026. But the 49ers over the past couple of years have not been nearly as good of a yak team. Now, the style of the offense has changed. I showed you the Brock Purdy stat earlier. He is deadly accurate on throws of 10 or more air yards downfield, which means that the 49ers can push the football downfield, and those throws just naturally aren't going to have as much yak. But it's still undeniable that they're not as good of a yards after the catch team as they were in the past. And if you want to make this offense more deadly, well, Omar Cooper Jr. was a yak machine at the University of Indiana. I view him more as a hybrid between Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk. A lot of people see that he lined up in the backfield a few times for Indiana and say, oh, that's Deebo Samuel. He's not 220, 230 plus like Deebo Samuel was. He's not built like an absolute brick like Deebo Samuel was. There's a little bit more length there for Omar Cooper Jr. I think there's better route running ability. I think he's more of a standard wide out. But, I mean, the fact that he's been multi-positional is a plus for Omar Cooper Jr. and could help the 49ers pick up some slack in a facet of the game that has definitely languished over the course of the past couple of seasons. More than anything, I want to emphasize this. I wrote this a little bit earlier on X, and I think that I've talked about this a lot on the show, but it is worth just hammering this home as far as discussion of draft strategy goes. Nobody in their right mind is obsessing over the exact play the 49ers will run on the 27th snap of the game against the Rams in week 1. If you're following the 49ers, who don't own a pick until number 27, it's much more useful to spend more time talking about the draft in terms of broad strategy than precise picks. What analytics will drive their decisions? Is there a general part of their team they want to infuse with youth? Last year, it was the run defense. The draft isn't as unpredictable as an actual game and should be previewed through the lens of general goals, with specifics not determined until the heat of the moment. The biggest general mistake of draft analysis is the thinking that it can somehow be precisely prognosticated. But the complete opposite is actually true. It's a big crapshoot. The mistake is a big reason why many are incapable of objectivity and player evaluation even long after the draft. In order to preserve the value of the takes they shout every April, they cling to projections as if they mean something after the fact. But they don't, and neither do all those speculative April takes. I present to you Brock Purdy. Pick number 262 has dominated the league ever since he entered, and there still are at least a handful of people who just cannot accept that And the main reason is rooted in their draftism. They are married to the projections that they make at this time of the year. And I'll tell you what, those projections really don't mean a whole lot. Zeroing in on individual players, demanding who's going to be the pick at number 27, who's going to be the pick at 58, or so on and so forth, is a wholly unproductive task. Where you find the actual meat of the draft and pre-draft preparation is by thinking of things like NFL front offices actually think of things, and that is through overarching strategy. Which general positions do you want to hit? What parts of the roster do you want to hit? The 49ers have the oldest offense in football now. They have the third youngest defense. Last year, they entered the draft as one of the oldest defenses. They modernized that unit by cutting a bunch of guys and by spending their first 5 picks on defensive players. It's going to be about time for the 49ers to modernize that offense. I've already talked about the receiver position and how Ricky Pearsall is the only one under contract beyond 2026 outside of Brandon Aiyuk, who scored a touchdown in their uniform. The 49ers have to get younger. They have to infuse new talent on that offensive side of the ball. And, well, it makes sense that they would pursue a receiver at some level of this draft, but they have to stay flexible because you don't know who's going to be available at number 27, and this team has multiple needs. But I think it's safe to say that receiver is one of the spots that they're targeting. And Caleb Douglas, the former teammate of Ricky Pearsall, is just the latest wideout that they've invited to their building ahead of the 2026 NFL Draft.